Rain traced slow, deliberate paths down the tall windows of Whitmore House, as though even the sky had paused to observe the quiet spectacle unfolding within. Candlelight trembled in crystal chandeliers, casting fractured gold across polished floors and silk-clad shoulders. It was an evening arranged with ruthless intention, an exhibition of eligibility, a measured display of worth. And at its fragile center stood Miss Eliza Whitmore, composed as porcelain, though the room had long since decided she was something far less enduring. She had chosen her gown with care, ivory muslin, modestly cut, its simplicity a silent rebellion against extravagance she could not afford. Yet among women adorned in jewels and confidence, her restraint was mistaken for deficiency. Glances lingered too long, whispers slipped too easily. A fan lifted here, a smirk concealed there, and always the same quiet conclusion passing between them like a shared indulgence. She was present, but not equal. "Eliza, stand a little straighter," her mother murmured without turning her head, her smile fixed as if stitched in place. One must never appear apologetic, even when circumstances are unfortunate. Eliza obeyed, though her spine had never bent to shame. It was not posture that betrayed her, but circumstance, her father's debts, her family's dwindled name, the absence of fortune where once there had been quiet security. These things clung to her more stubbornly than any ill-fitted gown. Near the far end of the room, a cluster of gentlemen observed with calculated detachment. One among them, newly arrived and scarcely noticed, had taken no position of prominence. His attire marked him as a servant, dark, unadorned, his presence permitted only by function. Yet his stillness was not that of submission. He watched, not as one instructed, but as one discerning. The Duke of Rathbourne had entered unnoticed, and he intended to remain so. He had heard enough of society's polite fabrications to distrust every polished introduction. A future wife, they had said, must be selected with care. She must be suitable, agreeable, advantageous. And so he had come not as himself, but as absence, as someone no one would perform for. Only then, he believed, could truth be glimpsed between the rehearsed gestures. And already truth revealed itself in quiet cruelties. "She carries herself like a lady," a voice murmured behind a gloved hand not quite concealed. "Though the world knows she is not one." A ripple of soft amusement followed, delicate as lace and twice as cutting. Eliza heard it. She did not flinch. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the musicians, as though the violin's gentle lament required her full attention. Only the faint tightening of her fingers betrayed the cost of such composure. It was not the insult itself that wounded her, she had grown accustomed to those, but the certainty behind it, the effortless agreement it inspired. The Duke watched closely. There was no desperation in her, no grasping attempt to reclaim favor. She did not laugh too brightly, nor linger too near those who might elevate her standing. Instead, she existed with a quiet dignity that refused to plead for recognition. It intrigued him, not because it was rare, but because it was so profoundly unacknowledged. "Miss Whitmore," came a voice smooth with intention. Mr. Lionel Ashcroft stepped forward, his smile polished to perfection, his reputation unmarred by inconvenience. He bowed just deeply enough to suggest sincerity, though his eyes held something less generous. "You honor the evening with your presence," he said. Eliza inclined her head. "I am glad the evening finds itself worthy of such honor, sir." There was a pause, brief, almost imperceptible, before he laughed, charmed despite himself. Yet beneath that charm, calculation stirred. The Duke saw it clearly, though others mistook it for interest. Ashcroft extended his arm. "May I claim the next dance?" A hesitation, no longer than a breath, passed through Eliza. Refusal was a luxury she could not afford. "You may," she replied. As they moved to the center of the room, conversation shifted to accommodate them. Eyes followed. Judgments sharpened. It was not admiration that filled the space, but speculation. Why her? What advantage could possibly justify such attention? The music began, and with it, the performance resumed. Yet the Duke did not watch the dance. His attention had been drawn elsewhere, toward a quieter corridor beyond the grand hall, where voices, less guarded, began to unfold. He moved without sound, his presence dismissed as easily as it had been granted. A temporary arrangement, nothing more, Ashcroft's voice carried, stripped now of its practiced warmth. The family is desperate. She will accept, and once matters are settled, a quiet dissolution will not be difficult. Another voice, amused and complicit, replied, and the advantage? A name, still respectable enough to open certain doors. Sympathy, perhaps. It is remarkable what society will forgive when it believes itself generous. A pause, then softer, colder still. She will not protest. Women like her rarely do. The Duke stood in shadow, unmoving, as the truth settled with chilling clarity. Across the hall, Eliza Whitmore turned in measured grace, unaware that her future had just been spoken of as though it were already concluded. And in that moment, something within the Duke, something long disciplined into indifference, shifted, not with outrage alone, but with a dangerous, unbidden resolve. Morning arrived at Whitmore House not with renewal, but with scrutiny. The rain had withdrawn, leaving the gardens jeweled with dew and the air sharpened by a quiet, expectant chill. Servants moved with hushed efficiency, restoring order to rooms that had hosted judgment the night before. Yet for Eliza Whitmore, order had not returned. It lingered in glances, in pauses too deliberate to be accidental, in the faint but persistent sense that something unseen had shifted against her. She stepped into the garden as though into refuge, her gloved fingers brushing the damp petals of late-blooming roses. Here, at least, nature asked no questions of lineage or fortune. Here, beauty did not demand justification. You walk as though the world has grown heavier overnight. The voice came gently, unannounced, yet unmistakably composed. Eliza turned to find the same servant she had scarcely noticed before, dark-clad, restrained, yet bearing himself with a quiet assurance that unsettled expectation. "I had not realized my walk was subject to observation," she replied. "Only by those who notice what others overlook." There was no insolence in his tone, only a calm sincerity that disarmed her. She studied him more closely now. His speech was too measured, his gaze too steady for a man accustomed to invisibility. And yet, he remained precisely that, unremarked upon by all but her. "The world often feels heavier where one is unwelcome," she said at last. "And yet you remain," he returned. "Where else should I go?" The question lingered between them, unanswered yet understood. He inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging not her words, but the quiet strength beneath them. "I believe," he said softly, "that some places are made worthy by those who endure them." Eliza looked away, unsettled by the unexpected weight of the remark. Before she could reply, he stepped back, the moment dissolving as swiftly as it had formed. When she returned to the house, she found a small object resting upon the table beside her seat, a book, modestly bound, its cover worn but carefully preserved. No name marked its ownership, yet a ribbon had been placed within, as though guiding her to a passage already chosen. Her fingers hesitated before opening it. The page revealed a line, underlined with deliberate restraint. "Dignity is not bestowed by the world's recognition, but sustained by the soul's refusal to surrender." Eliza closed the book slowly, her breath caught between surprise and something more fragile. No one had ever spoken to her in such a language, not aloud and certainly not in secret. "Curious," came her mother's voice, sharp with quiet suspicion. "Gifts rarely arrive without intention." "It may not be a gift," Eliza said carefully. "Then it is worse, a suggestion." The implication settled heavily. Already, the morning carried whispers not yet spoken aloud. By afternoon, those whispers had found voice. "She encourages attention," one lady remarked within earshot, her tone cloaked in civility. "Even from those beneath her station." It suggests a certain flexibility. Another responded with a soft, knowing laugh. Or desperation. Eliza felt the words as one might feel a draft through a closed door, subtle, yet impossible to ignore. She neither turned nor reacted, though each syllable pressed against her composure with quiet persistence. Across the room, the servant stood once more, observing. Their eyes met briefly, and in that fleeting exchange, something passed between them, not comfort, precisely, but recognition. Evening descended with renewed spectacle. Carriages arrived in polished succession, delivering guests adorned in fresh elegance and sharpened curiosity. The air itself seemed to anticipate revelation. Mr. Ashcroft approached her again, his manner unchanged, though his attention had grown more deliberate. "You appear distracted, Miss Whitmore," he noted. "Only thoughtful," she replied. "Then allow me to provide clarity," he said smoothly. "Uncertainty is rarely a companion to happiness." "And certainty, sir?" she asked. "Is it always kinder?" His smile faltered, just briefly. "It is always more useful." He extended his hand once more. She accepted, though the gesture felt less like choice and more like inevitability. As they moved through the dance, his grip tightened imperceptibly. "You would do well to trust my intentions," he murmured. Eliza met his gaze, searching, weighing. Intentions, I find, are rarely revealed in words alone. For a moment, something colder surfaced beneath his charm. Then it vanished, replaced once more by practiced ease. "You are perceptive," he said. "It will serve you, if properly guided." The music ended. Applause followed. Yet beneath it all, tension coiled, unseen but undeniable. Later, as the corridors dimmed and conversation softened, Eliza found herself drawn once more toward the quiet edges of the house. The servant emerged again, as though summoned by thought alone. "You are the cause of it," she said without preamble. "Of what?" he asked. "The whispers." He considered her, not denying, not retreating. "Would you prefer silence?" he asked. "I would prefer honesty." "And if honesty invites scandal? Then let it be honest scandal," she replied. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his expression. "Then you are braver than this house deserves." Before she could respond, voices approached, familiar, careless, unguarded. "The announcement will be made soon," Ashcroft's voice carried, edged now with certainty. "She suspects nothing. Once secured, the rest is mere arrangement." Another voice replied, lower, amused. "And if she resists?" "She will not," he said. "She has no position from which to refuse." Eliza stood frozen, the words striking with quiet, devastating precision. Beside her, the servant did not move. For the first time, she understood not merely the whispers, but the design behind them. And when she turned toward him, seeking explanation, she found not a servant's silence, but a gaze that held knowledge, and a decision yet unspoken. Night settled over Whitmore House with a deliberate hush, as though the walls themselves had grown wary of what they contained. The corridors dimmed into shadow, their polished grandeur softened by candlelight that flickered like uncertain breath. Beyond the tall windows, the darkness pressed close, heavy and watchful. It was within this quiet, suspended hour that Eliza Whitmore found herself drawn once more toward the library, as though some unspoken gravity compelled her there. She did not expect him to be waiting. Yet he was. Standing near the hearth, where a low fire cast amber light across his face, the man she had known only as a servant seemed transformed by stillness alone. His posture bore no trace of subservience now, instead, it carried a quiet authority, restrained yet unmistakable. The shadows no longer concealed him, they revealed him. "You knew," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "You heard what was intended." He inclined his head, neither denying nor softening the truth. "I did. And you said nothing." "I believed," he replied carefully, "that you deserved to hear it without interference." A flicker of something sharper crossed her expression. "Or perhaps you believed I would accept it." His gaze held hers, unwavering. I believed you would understand it. The distinction settled between them, subtle yet profound. Eliza moved further into the room, the warmth of the fire failing to reach the quiet chill within her. Understanding does not lessen its cruelty, she said. It merely removes the illusion. Then the illusion has served its final purpose, he answered. She turned toward him fully now, her composure no longer untouched, but forged anew through clarity. You speak as though you are separate from it, from this world that measures and bargains and decides without consent. Perhaps I am, he said softly. Or perhaps, she countered, you are simply better at observing it. A faint breath of something like admiration passed through his expression. You see more than you are permitted to say. And you say more than you are permitted to be, she replied. Silence followed, but it was no longer empty. It carried weight, recognition, and the fragile edge of something neither dared yet to name. Eliza stepped closer to the table, her fingers resting lightly against its polished surface. You left the book, she said. Yes. Why? He considered the question, not as one asked lightly, but as one that demanded truth. Because I wished to know whether you believed its words. And if I did? Then I would know that what they say of you is incomplete. She studied him, her gaze searching not for answers, but for sincerity. And what do they say of me? That you are convenient, he replied, his voice low but unyielding. That you are manageable. That you will accept what is offered because you have no power to refuse. A quiet breath left her, not in surprise but in confirmation. And what do you say? That they are wrong. The certainty in his voice struck deeper than any whispered insult. It was not comfort, it was conviction. Eliza turned away, her composure wavering not from weakness, but from the sudden, unfamiliar weight of being seen. You speak with a confidence that does not belong to your station, she said. And you listen with a discernment that does not belong to yours, he returned. She faced him again, her eyes sharper now. Then neither of us is where we are expected to be. No, he said quietly. We are not. The fire crackled softly, its warmth pressing against the fragile boundary between them. Outside, the wind stirred, brushing faintly against the glass as though urging the night forward. You said nothing when you heard him, Eliza continued, her voice steadier now. You did not intervene. You did not warn me. I am warning you now. Her gaze narrowed slightly. Why? He stepped closer, though not enough to breach propriety, only enough to make his presence undeniable. Because what he intends is not merely advantageous, it is deliberate. He will secure your acceptance, and then he will unmake you. The words hung in the air, stark and unadorned. Eliza absorbed them without flinching. And what would you have me do? She asked. Refuse him. A faint, almost incredulous smile touched her lips. You speak as though refusal is a choice freely given. It is, he said. For you perhaps. For anyone who values dignity above survival. The remark struck, not as accusation, but as challenge. Eliza's expression hardened, though not in anger. Dignity does not feed a household, she said quietly. It does not restore a name. It does not silence the world. No, he agreed. But it preserves the one thing the world cannot return once taken. And what is that? She asked. Yourself. The word lingered, heavier than any argument. Eliza looked at him then, truly looked, as though the truth she had sensed now demanded recognition. You are not what you claim to be, she said. He did not answer. You speak as one who has never been denied choice, she continued. You observe as one who has never been dismissed. You stand as though this house, and all within it, belongs to you. A pause. Then, softly, tell me I am mistaken. The firelight shifted, casting his features into sharper relief. For a moment, the distance between them seemed to collapse, leaving only the truth waiting to be spoken. I cannot, he said. Her breath caught, not in shock, but in confirmation. Footsteps sounded faintly beyond the door, distant, approaching, inevitable. "You must go," she said quickly, though her voice carried more than urgency. It carried uncertainty, and something dangerously close to trust. He did not move. "Eliza," he said, her name spoken not as courtesy, but as recognition. She stilled. "There are truths yet to be revealed," he continued, his voice low, deliberate. "But not like this. Not in shadows that diminish them." The footsteps grew louder. "And when they are revealed?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His gaze held hers, unwavering, resolute. "Everything you believe about this house," he said quietly, "will change." The door handle stirred, and for the first time Eliza Whitmore felt the ground beneath her certainty begin to shift, not with fear alone, but with the dangerous promise of something far greater than she had ever been permitted to expect. The following evening unfolded with a brilliance that bordered on cruelty, as though the house itself conspired to conceal its fractures beneath a spectacle of perfection. Chandeliers blazed with unwavering light, their reflections multiplying endlessly in gilded mirrors, while music swelled with practiced elegance. Every guest arrived adorned not merely in silk and jewels, but in expectation, of alliances, of advantage, of quiet triumphs disguised as civility. Eliza Whitmore stood at the edge of that brilliance, composed beyond reproach, though something within her had irrevocably altered. The night before had stripped illusion from intention, leaving her with a clarity that neither comforted nor weakened her. She no longer mistook attention for regard, nor politeness for sincerity. Yet the knowledge did not free her, it confined her to a choice she had not yet made. "Miss Whitmore," her mother murmured, her voice taut with restrained urgency. "You must not appear distant this evening. Mr. Ashcroft has expressed particular interest." Eliza inclined her head, though her gaze did not waver from the room before her. "Interest is easily expressed, Mamma. It is rarely examined." "This is not the time for examination," her mother pressed softly. "It is the time for acceptance." The words settled heavily, not as guidance, but as expectation long rehearsed. Across the ballroom, Mr. Lionel Ashcroft stood among a cluster of admirers, his confidence unmarred by doubt. When his eyes found Eliza, his smile deepened, not with warmth, but with certainty. He began to move toward her, each step measured, inevitable. Yet before he could reach her, a subtle disruption stirred the room. It began not with sound, but with attention, heads turning, whispers faltering, the delicate rhythm of conversation slipping ever so slightly out of harmony. A figure had entered, though no announcement marked his arrival. He moved through the space with unhurried precision, his presence neither ostentatious nor concealed, yet impossible to ignore. Eliza felt it before she saw him. When her gaze met his, the world seemed, for a fleeting moment, to still. He was no longer dressed in shadow. The restraint of his former attire had been replaced by something unmistakable, dark tailoring of impeccable cut, silver catching faintly at the edges, every detail aligned with a rank that required no declaration. Yet it was not the clothing that transformed him. It was the absence of concealment. The servant was gone. In his place stood a man who had never belonged to invisibility. A murmur rippled outward, growing in quiet intensity. "The Duke Rathbourne. It cannot be." But it was. The Duke of Rathbourne had stepped fully into the light. Eliza did not move. She could not. The truth she had sensed now stood before her, undeniable, irrevocable. Every word he had spoken, every glance he had offered, shifted beneath the weight of revelation. Mr. Ashcroft halted, his composure faltering for the first time. "Your Grace," he said, bowing with precision that bordered on urgency. "An unexpected honor." The Duke inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the gesture without granting it significance. His gaze moved past Ashcroft, settling instead upon Eliza with a steadiness that held no trace of apology. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying with quiet authority across the space between them. The room listened. Eliza stepped forward, drawn not by expectation, but by something far more dangerous, understanding. "Your Grace," she replied, her tone measured, though her pulse betrayed her. A silence followed, taut and expectant. "I believe," the Duke continued, "that there are matters within this room that require clarification." Ashcroft's smile returned, though its edges had sharpened. "If this concerns Miss Whitmore, I assure you, my intentions are entirely honorable." "Intentions," the Duke said calmly, "are best measured when unobserved." A flicker of unease passed through the gathered guests. "I would caution," Ashcroft began, but the Duke did not yield him space. "You spoke," the Duke said, his voice neither raised nor softened, "of securing her acceptance as though it were a transaction. You spoke of dissolution as though it were convenience. You spoke of her as though she were unaware." The words struck with precision, their restraint rendering them all the more devastating. Ashcroft's composure fractured. "You overstep, Your Grace." "No," the Duke replied. "I reveal." The distinction settled heavily, impossible to dismiss. A ripple of whispers spread, no longer subtle, no longer contained. Eliza stood at the center of it, the weight of exposure pressing against her, yet something within her refused to yield. Shame did not rise. It receded. "You presume much," Ashcroft said, his voice tightening. "Even if such words were spoken, they do not alter the reality of her position." "And what reality is that?" the Duke asked. "That she requires alliance," Ashcroft answered, his restraint thinning. "That she cannot afford refusal." The room stilled. The Duke's gaze did not waver. "A lady's worth," he said, each word deliberate, "is not measured by her necessity, but by her resolve. And hers, I find, exceeds the measure you have assigned her." Eliza felt the words as though they had been placed carefully into her keeping, not as rescue, but as recognition. Ashcroft's expression hardened. "You would elevate her beyond her station?" "I would see her as she is," the Duke replied. The simplicity of it carried more force than any declaration. Silence followed, but it was no longer uncertain. It had shifted, subtly, irrevocably. The Duke turned then, not to the room, but to Eliza. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice quieter now, though no less certain, "if you would permit it, I should like to know you not as circumstance has defined you, but as you have proven yourself to be." The offer did not glitter. It did not promise salvation. It asked for something far more profound, choice. Every gaze turned toward her, expectation reshaped into something sharper, more urgent. Acceptance would restore her standing. Refusal would condemn her to it. Eliza felt the weight of both. She looked at the Duke, at the man who had seen her without advantage, who had spoken truth without adornment, who had stepped into light not to claim her, but to confront what threatened her. Yet trust, once fractured by the world, did not mend with ease. "You ask," she said slowly, her voice steady despite the storm beneath it, "that I place faith where I have been given reason to doubt." "I ask," he replied, "that you choose without fear." The words lingered, fragile and immense. Around them, the room held its breath. And Eliza Whitmore, standing at the fragile edge between survival and self-possession, realized that the choice before her was no longer between two men, but between the life she had endured, and the truth she had only just begun to claim. Dawn did not arrive with haste, but with a slow and deliberate grace, as though the world itself hesitated to disturb what the night had unsettled. A pale wash of gold stretched across the horizon, filtering gently through the tall windows of Whitmore House, softening the edges of a place that had, only hours before, been sharpened by judgment and spectacle. The chandeliers stood dim now, their brilliance surrendered to morning light, and in that quiet surrender, something within the house seemed altered, less certain, less absolute. Eliza Whitmore stood alone in the garden, where the earth still held the memory of rain. Each step she took brushed against dew-laden grass, the fragile droplets clinging, then falling, as though reluctant to release what they had briefly claimed. The world here felt untouched by whispers, untouched by calculation. And yet, she carried both within her. The night's revelations had not left her unscathed. They had stripped away illusion with a precision that left little room for comfort. Mr. Ashcroft's intentions, once veiled in charm, now stood exposed as cold design. The Duke, no longer a shadow, no longer a question, had shattered expectation in a manner both disarming and dangerous. He had not offered rescue. He had offered recognition. And that, she realized, was far more unsettling. You have chosen solitude. His voice came not as interruption, but as continuation, as though the space itself had anticipated him. Eliza did not turn immediately. I have chosen clarity, she replied. The Duke of Rathbourne stepped beside her, his presence no longer concealed, yet no less measured. In daylight, he seemed less distant though not diminished. There was no performance in him now, no careful disguise, only a quiet certainty that neither demanded nor retreated. Clarity often resembles solitude, he said. And yet, she returned, finally meeting his gaze, it is rarely free of consequence. A faint acknowledgment touched his expression. Nor should it be. They stood in silence for a moment, not empty, but reflective. The air carried the faint scent of roses, their petals opening to a light that asked nothing of them but to exist. You altered the course of that room, Eliza said at last. Not merely by revealing yourself, but by revealing them. I altered nothing that was not already in motion, he replied. I merely refused to allow it to remain unseen. And in doing so, she said quietly, you placed me at its center. You were already there, he answered. Only now, it cannot be denied. The truth of it settled without resistance. Eliza drew a slow breath, her composure no longer the fragile shield it had once been, but something steadier, something chosen. You ask that I decide without fear, she said. Yet fear has been the one constant granted to me without condition. And what has it given you? He asked. She considered the question, not as challenge, but as invitation. Endurance, she said. Caution. Silence. And has it given you yourself? The question lingered, quiet and piercing. Eliza looked away briefly, her gaze tracing the delicate curve of a rose just beginning to bloom. No, she admitted. Then perhaps, he said gently, it is time to choose differently. She turned back to him, her expression no longer uncertain, but searching. You speak of choice as though it exists without cost. It does not, he said. But neither does submission. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, not of amusement, but of recognition. You are relentless. I am precise, he corrected. And you believe precision is kindness? I believe, he said, his voice softening, that honesty is. The simplicity of it carried weight far beyond its words. Eliza. Her name, spoken without title or distance, drew her fully into the moment. There was no audience here, no expectation beyond what she allowed. If you stand beside me, he continued, it shall not be as one rescued, nor as one obligated. I have no desire to claim what is not freely given. And what is it you seek? She asked. His gaze held hers, steady and unguarded. To know you as you are. To stand with you as you choose to be. The answer did not overwhelm. It settled. Eliza felt the shift within herself, not sudden, not forced, but inevitable. The world she had navigated with such care had always demanded that she become less in order to belong. And now, for the first time, she was being asked to become more. I will not be pitted, she said, her voice firm. You are not, he replied. I will not be shaped to suit expectation. I would not permit it. I will not accept what is offered merely because it is offered. Then do not, he said simply. The quiet certainty in his words did not confine her. It freed her. Eliza stepped closer, not in surrender, but in decision. If I stand beside you, she said, it shall be as an equal heart, not a grateful one. A flicker of something deeper passed through his expression, not surprise, but recognition of something long awaited. "Then," he said, his voice low and resolute, "I shall spend my life proving you have always been one." The words did not bind her. They honored her. And in that moment Eliza Whitmore understood that what she chose now would not merely shape her future, it would restore her to herself. "I accept," she said. The words were quiet, yet they carried with them a force no ballroom declaration could rival. They were not spoken for the world. They were spoken despite it. For a moment nothing moved. The garden held its breath, the light lingering as though unwilling to pass too quickly over what had just been forged. Then, slowly, the world resumed. A carriage waited beyond the wrought iron gates, its polished surface catching the morning sun. It was not escape that awaited her, nor transformation into something unrecognizable. It was continuation, on her own terms. As they walked together toward it, the house behind them seemed to recede, its judgments diminished by distance and irrelevance. Yet even as she stepped forward, Eliza felt the weight of what remained. Society did not forget. It did not forgive easily. And the truth, once revealed, did not always settle into acceptance. She paused, just briefly, her gaze lifting toward the horizon where light met shadow. "Do you believe," she asked softly, "that the world will allow this?" The Duke followed her gaze, his expression unreadable, yet certain. "No," he said. The answer did not waver. Eliza's breath caught, not in fear, but in understanding. "Then we shall not ask it to," he continued. And as the carriage door opened, as the morning stretched forward into a future neither promised nor permitted, Eliza Whitmore stepped not into certainty, but into something far more powerful: choice.